Caitlin, are you in the room?
I am.
Oh,
Can you hear me okay?
Okay, this is a remote talk. I didn't realize this is a remote talk. I actually thought I was going to be able to shake your hand. I'm really, really excited to have you here virtually with a virtual handshake.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm just running over to my little studio here, so I'll turn on my camera in one moment. It's my honor to be with everybody. I saw JAMESON posting his photo with ZIMMERMANN this morning and thought, oh man, I wish I were there with all of you today. Sorry I couldn't travel. We are a little busy right now at Custodia Bank.
Awesome. We're just waiting for your picture to show up.
All right, let's see. Accessing the camera.
Amazing.
All right, folks.
Hi, Caitlin. Welcome to Prague.
Hey, I wish I were there with you. You've got a great event and a lot of great people. And I'll go ahead and dive right in. I know we've got about 20 minutes. So what I'd like to talk a little bit about today, I'm one of the mere mortals in this industry. And by that, I mean the developers are the most important people in the Bitcoin ecosystem. The things that folks like us who are not developers can do is to help foster the ecosystem in the non-technology areas. And of course, where I've been spending my time is trying to close off legal attack vectors. That's something that Trace Mayer early identified as one of the challenges for us in the industry. And then also the banking attack vector. So let's talk first about what are those attack vectors. All of us know that a total ban on Bitcoin isn't possible. We've learned that from the Napster years, from Tor. Code is just speech, and it's not possible to succeed in an outright ban of Bitcoin. Countries will try it, have failed, probably will try it again, but it's not possible to execute an outright ban. So what are the attack vectors that are the most immediate threats? The answer is it's the on-off ramps from fiat currency into the Bitcoin ecosystem and some of the legal attack vectors surrounding that. The on-off ramps, as we know, have been unreliable. There are a number of banks who have chosen to specialize in serving our industry, but they've been attacked at various stages, including Custodia Bank ourselves. But it is lawful to service this industry, and most of the banks that are continuing to service the industry are just getting extra regulatory scrutiny, but not necessarily being shut out. I will say, though, just today I noticed a story. Chase Bank in the UK will be blocking all payments involving any crypto-related activities. So it is continuing. In the United States, Nick Carter termed this Operation Choke Point 2.0 in a reference to the original Operation Choke Point, which was an effort in the Obama administration that started a little under 10 years ago to attack certain industries that were not politically favored by the Obama administration. So keeping the on-off ramps is one of the things that folks like us can help do. The second thing is working on regulations. Regulations can either be restrictive or enabling. And I think many of you know that I've been working on enabling regulations in the state of Wyoming. The enabling regulations that Wyoming has passed, it has now passed 33 different laws in 6 legislative sessions. And some of those are very simple and foundational. One is that Wyoming acknowledges that Bitcoin is property under property law, so that a judge, in the event of a dispute over who owns a Bitcoin, knows exactly what to do. It can apply existing property laws. Another is that code is speech in Wyoming. If a developer writes code, as long as that code is not used by that developer to commit a crime, then that is protected speech. So there are enabling regulations and laws that can be passed, and that's where I've been spending my time. There are restrictive laws and regulations that can be passed as well, those are the attack vectors that we have to continue to watch and spend a lot of time. This is where I do work with the broader ecosystem, even though I'm predominantly a Bitcoiner. I do work with the broader ecosystem because there are efforts in the broader ecosystem that we have in common to try to ensure that the restrictive regulations don't shut us down. Let's next talk about the banking piece, because that's where I am spending most of my time. Banks in the world, under the Bank for International Settlements, Basel III, and in the United States, prompt corrective action capital requirements, banks are allowed to bank this industry. The US, of course, has been the most restrictive of the developed world countries on this point. But they can only bank this industry if they specialize in the risks. And there are extra risks for banks to bank this industry. Of course, the biggest one is the anti-money laundering, know your customer risks. And it's absolutely possible for banks to comply with the laws. That creates extra friction. It is what it is. Those of us who are trying to keep the on-off ramps open for this industry can only take on so many fights at a time. And some of you know we're in a big fight with the Federal Reserve ourselves right now at Custodia Bank. But that is clearly a risk, and it's one of the reasons why most banks don't dabble in this industry. Another one is the operational risk. And then, of course, last but probably most important is the technology risk. In the United States, you'd be shocked at how backwards the technology platforms for the banking system is. It is still, most banks don't even have APIs. And so the concept of being able to transact or act as a bridge between this industry and the traditional banking industry is very, very difficult for a bank that doesn't even have an API to execute. And so banks that specialize in these risks are very important banks to support and to help ensure that the regulators don't shut down. At Custodia, one of the other really important pieces that we're spending time on is to support the Bitcoin mining industry. The Bitcoin mining industry is, of course, a critical component of the ecosystem. And there is one of the places where it's critical for the on-off ramps to continue to exist. Why? Because power companies don't pay their employees and pay their vendors in Bitcoin. Power companies pay their employees and their vendors in their local fiat currency. Therefore, there does have to be some on-off ramp available. With the failure of the two big banks that serve this industry in the United States, Silvergate and Signature, earlier this year, those on-off ramps were substantially disrupted. And that's a place where Custodia is spending a lot of time. For those of you in the Bitcoin ecosystem specifically, you probably know Lisa Huff. She has just joined Custodia to work on and help us build the unique financial services to support the mining industry, specifically in the United States. But we are, in our business plan, authorized to do business outside of the United States. We're just not ready to do that now. And so in the mining ecosystem, one of the most interesting things is that the banks are, and frankly, the power companies are afraid to service it because there have been so many defaults. There have been mining companies that ran up big power bills. The Bitcoin price had a downswing, and the mining companies simply walked away and defaulted on their power bills. And so that creates an interesting challenge where the financial services players like Custodia that are trying to support this ecosystem can step in and create daily payment in our case, US dollars, to the power companies, which is one of the demands that will help, I think, support the continued access to power for the mining companies that are mining, especially in on-grid mining. And that's what we're spending time for, these unique needs in the mining industry. Lastly, I'll talk a little bit about Custodia. We are a Bitcoiners bank built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoin. We are authorized and have recently launched in a certain number of states. I cannot market because we're not licensed to do business in the Czech Republic. But if you are interested in learning more, please go to our website where we do have a list of all the states in the United States where we're already doing business. What's interesting about Custodia is that we are about to unveil a new type of Bitcoin custody. Now, many of you will probably hear custody and think that it's nails on a chalkboard. Why did a committed Bitcoiner build a Bitcoin custodian when I constantly use the phrase, not your keys, not your coins, and I live it and I believe it? The answer is that there are certain types of owners of Bitcoin who legally cannot self-custody. And there are others who, because of the connectivity to the banking system, will need to have continued access to a custody arrangement, such as the miners we were just talking about, to be able to liquidate to US dollars. That has to go through some custodian, even if it's just for a 10-minute block time. It does have to come back into the financial system. And so the question is, how can a custodian build something that respects the ethos of Satoshi? Number one, the bank that Custodia has built is a Rothbardian bank. Most of you will know what that means. It's a non-lending, 100% reserve bank that holds 100% of its US dollars in cash. Our proposal, of course, was to hold 108% of our US dollars in cash at the Federal Reserve, and as you know, that's in litigation right now. But regarding the Bitcoin piece, we're about to unveil something that doesn't exist in the market right now as a Bitcoin custodian, and that is true segregated custody. Custodia built a platform that will custody actual UTXOs. That is closer than the omnibus or pooled custody model that most Bitcoin custodians use today, closer to Satoshi's ethos. The concept of being able to custody a customer's actual UTXOs, as opposed to having the customer send their UTXOs into an omnibus wallet, and then the custodian owes back an equal amount of Bitcoin from that omnibus wallet. Well, we've seen, as a couple of custodians have failed in the United States, we've seen that the custody customers had to take a proportionate haircut because they became a creditor of the omnibus pool of Bitcoin. That's not what Satoshi designed Bitcoin to do. So, of course, there were references to Bitcoin banks. Custodia, and frankly, any of the banks in the United States are not allowed to hold Bitcoin on balance sheet, but we can provide custody services, and the custody services that we've built are doing our darndest to keep it as close as possible to a not your keys, not your coins ethos, because of course we all know that that is the optimal organizational structure for Bitcoin. There's a reason why the cypherpunks built Bitcoin the way you did. And it isn't just proof of work. We talk, of course, a lot about proof of work as what is securing Bitcoin. It's really Nakamoto consensus, which is proof of work plus the longest chain rule. And of course, the difficulty adjustment built in there. So how do we keep the on-off ramps to the old fiat system that we all know is eventually going to be drastically disrupted by these new technologies? The answer is we do our darndest to keep it closest to the approach that Satoshi took in creating Bitcoin and respecting the cypherpunk ideals. I think I'll close it there. I don't know if you have, if you'd like to try to take questions, or how are we doing timing wise? I don't have a copy of, I don't have a phone handy.
I think we're doing fine. I think we can probably scare up a couple of questions for Caitlin. There we go.
Frank Holmes here. Have you looked at other jurisdictions outside of the U.S. like Bermuda, which has regulations and have had them for about 3 years?
Yes, great question. In fact, Wyoming copied the original custody regulations of Bermuda. And so Bermuda is interesting, of course, having its connections to the UK and being respected because of its insurance regulations within the TradFi ecosystem. The challenge is that Bermuda doesn't have US dollar banks. And so all Bermudian banks still need to go through the US dollar ecosystem. I had a conversation recently with a major player in this industry who told me that they talked to all of the top 15 US banks, and every one of them told him that their regulators told them not to bank the crypto industry. And the reason I bring that up in the context of Bermuda is those top 15 US banks are going to be the biggest correspondent banks that service offshore banks like Bermuda. And so if all of them have been told not to bank the crypto industry, I can't prove that, but I think it's based on what I know, it seems true, then it's going to be difficult. And Bermuda doesn't give any better access to US dollars than the onshore US markets, which is where we're in the trenches fighting the fight. Good question.
So I have a question for you, Caitlin. This is Michael. A current narrative that we have with number go up is that the potential approval of an ETF is being slowed down because large incumbent organizations are all competing to acquire cheap Satoshis. I think it's an inevitability that at some point Bitcoin is part of the established financial system. We know that there's a trajectory and a trend going in that direction. And you're probably one of the closest to that process with the application for Custodia Bank. So my question is, how long do you think it is before we're not a spot coin, a spot ETF, but how long do you think we're away from, integrated bank-supported Bitcoin acceptance? Yeah. Yeah,
great question. As you know, I have said for years that the ETF would be a double-edged sword for Bitcoin because ETFs are just wrappers around the core product, which in this case would be Bitcoin. And they have the ability to play the old Wall Street games, specifically rehypothecation, creating claims to Bitcoin that are not backed up with actual Bitcoins. If you look at every ETF prospectus, you will see that the market makers have the ability to create naked short positions in the underlying. Why? Because the SEC allows them to create continuous markets. The SEC has prioritized liquidity over solvency. And as a result, the market makers can create more units of the ETF than they hold actual Bitcoin in custody. So we will start seeing some of those Wall Street games, just like we've seen them with the futures markets, and we've seen them with the companies like BlockFi and Celsius that told their customers they were rehypothecating their customers' coins. In Celsius, the judge, by the way, in the bankruptcy said, okay, the customers' coins under custody belong to the customers, but he wasn't going to give them back until the entire bankruptcy cleared. And so the creditors committee of custody customers took agreed to take a 27.5% haircut. They got 72.5 cents on the dollar of their custodied assets back, just so they wouldn't have to wait through the long and arduous and expensive bankruptcy process. Heck, Mt. Gox it's going to be 10 years before the Gox creditors get our coins back, of which I was one. That was one of my lessons. That's when I learned the not your coins, not your keys, not your coin lesson. I consider it cheap tuition, but it does take a long time to go through bankruptcy. So long story short, I think the Bitcoin ETF is coming, but it's not necessarily a positive. One of the things about the Bitcoin ETF that would be interesting, and I've publicly talked about it, and as we get Custodia up and running, I very much would like to work with an asset manager to do the following. Technically, under ETFs, there is an ability for the investor to redeem the unit for the underlying. The issue is that the ETF structure gives only the issuer the option to allow the investor to redeem a unit for the underlying. So you see where I'm going. If an ETF were to be introduced that gave the investor in the ETF unit the option to redeem for the underlying Bitcoin, then that becomes quite an interesting pathway for more people to acquire Bitcoin and enter our ecosystem. Now, that doesn't exist right now, but Custodia's got the Bitcoin custody capability. Again, we're not officially launched yet. Stay tuned, we are this close. But we're working on this exact idea of creating an ETF that will allow the investor to redeem for the underlying, and that it would keep the games from being played. So back to your question about the big incumbents, though. Look, BlackRock is the 10-ton gorilla in the United States. There are a lot of people who believe that it will be the first one approved because the SEC and frankly all the regulators in the United States, they say they don't like the big businesses, but watch what they do, not what they say. They continue to make the big businesses even bigger and more powerful. And they will say they are comfortable with the big businesses, and because they've done all the regulations right, and that's how they try to keep the upstarts and the challengers out. Is favoring the big incumbents because they know how to comply with the regulations, and so that's, I think, probably going to happen, but. I'm spending way too much time in Washington, D.C. with my ear to the ground, and I do not think an ETF is going to be approved until the end of the Biden administration, whether that's next November or whether that's 5 years from now. I do not think Gary Gensler is going to approve an ETF. So I'm not here to give investment advice. As most of you know, I don't care about the Bitcoin price. I'm more focused on building the ecosystem, and the price is going to take care of itself long term. But I would not personally, I would not make a bet that the ETF is going to be approved before the end of the Biden administration.
Okay, so as a final question, who's Gary Gensler going to be working for?
So you know what's funny? I've said this publicly basically since February, when we figured out everything that was going on. Like I said, Operation Choke Point 2.0 is real, and we knew about it at Custodia on January 25th or 26th. Okay, it was early. Why? Because we got an email from a reporter who said that they knew that all of the pending bank charter applications that had anything to do with crypto were being asked simultaneously to withdraw their applications from the different banking agencies in Washington, D.C. Okay, so we knew that there was a coordinated effort to shut down crypto. And we had insiders coming to us almost immediately to tell us everything. Washington, D.C. is a sieve. So I've known I've been told by reliable sources. I can't prove the following, but President Biden doesn't care about financial services. President Biden is more of a foreign policy guy, and a deal had been cut with Senator Elizabeth Warren and by the way, Mike Novogratz is now talking about this publicly. This had been an open secret for a while. But it's now out there by someone who's very close to the Democratic Party, a huge Democratic Party donor, Mike Novogratz. He said at MainNet last week, he said the quiet part out loud, which is that Senator Elizabeth Warren, a deal had been cut between her and President Biden that she got to veto the financial services nominees of the Biden administration. And her people at the White House were the ones who we've been told executed the crackdown in the United States on crypto. And we've been told it by so many people at this point, and now it's an open secret. Ryan Selkis has been tweeting about this. So what's interesting is that the person at the White House who allegedly orchestrated all of this is leaving the White House. His last day is Friday. So now the question is, will anything change? Because Gary Gensler was absolutely part of that. There were 3 people who I've been told locked arms and moved forward in the United States to crack down on crypto. And I've also been told they honestly thought they could drive it to zero. Okay, that's hilarious, but they thought so because they think there's nothing backing it up. And it's all just circular leverage. And if they popped the leverage bubble, they would drive it to zero. We all laugh and think, what a joke. They should have known they weren't going to succeed, but they honestly thought they were. Well, they didn't succeed. And now we're starting to see some cracks open. Okay, the Fed went from in the Custodia denial saying, hell no, never, to now there's a novel activity supervision program 7 months later. Okay, so is that a crack in the door? Probably. But we don't know how big the crack is. So to answer your question, who's Gary Gensler going to be working for? Well, he's in his job because of these deals that got cut behind the scenes that were, again, in Washington, open secrets that now are not secret anymore because big Democrats are talking about them publicly. But it is the case, allegedly, and therefore the interesting question is there, as campaign season in the United States starts to heat up, is there going to be a backing away from this extreme anti-crypto position? And nobody knows the answer to that except the people who are cutting the backroom deals. But I think we have to assume as an industry that none of the people who are in their current jobs are going anywhere, not until the end of the Biden administration. And if we get a positive surprise because the most vehement anti-crypto critic is gone, then I think we should take it as a positive surprise. But the base case is that nothing changes.
Thank you so much for that insider info that's not financial advice.
Definitely not. And, I'm sure the cypherpunks in the crowd are just cringing at this whole talk. But all I'll say is, somebody's got to carry the flag and try to keep, the fiat on-off ramps open for this industry while we're still building it. And I really appreciate the support of everyone in this ecosystem for what we've been doing. Most of you do understand why it's necessary and that we're doing the best we can to stick to the ethos of Satoshi. So enjoy the rest of your event. I hope to be there next year at the next one.
Great. Thank you
Thanks
so much, Caitlin.